Hello, everyone. My name is Jovan Henderson. I'm a current junior, class of 2027. My role for the Center of Baghdad Studies is a student ambassador. So I'm here to do the introductions for today. Next slide, please. Welcome to the webinar. To help you enjoy the presentation today, we recommend you to join via the application. If there are some tech issues, you can pick the different features to make sure you can view the layout. If you're on a phone or an iPad, sometimes it's a bit difficult. So we always suggest using the next slide. I also have a suggestion for the best view of the presentation and the presenter. You can hit the view option on the right corner, and you can hit gallery view. Next slide. We will be providing voice interpretation and closed caption for this presentation today. Again, there are options on the bottom of your screen. If you hit the CC button, it will allow you to turn on the captions. And if you do want to have access to the audio, you can also turn up to ensure you can hear the interpreters. We will also be hosting Q&A after the presentation today. Q&A button is right next to the closed caption button. If you prefer to keep your question anonymous, you can check that feature. There's also reaction buttons during the presentation. Next slide. Here is our webinar etiquette checklist. We do ask that you keep muted. Secondly, please keep your video off. In order to ensure that you have enough bandwidth and that you can see the video clearly, we suggest that you close extra browser tabs and any applications so you can see the webinar better. As we mentioned, we will be having at the end of the presentation. Please use the Q&A feature, and if you have any technical issues, there's the chat. And please be respectful as well. We also want to let you know who the series is named after. This is Dr. Andrew J. Foster. He is a pioneer in the deaf Black history, in the deaf community. He overcame system of oppression and segregation, and he was a Gallaudet alumni class of 1955. After graduating from Gallaudet to Africa to establish over 30 deaf schools in that continent. And so I definitely look up to him as a role model. Next slide. Here are some upcoming lectures that we have that are part of the series. We have Dr. Akila M. English presenting on campus. Her title is Disrupting Anti-Blackness in K through 12 Education through a Black Deaf Framework. She will be presenting November 14th, 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. at the Student Academic Center in the multipurpose room. We also call it the NPR area. Next slide, please. Without further ado, I'll let you know our current presentation titled "Becoming a Black Deaf Woman from a Generational Black Deaf Family," featuring Dr. Mary Perrodin-Singh. All right, without further ado, bring it over to Dr. Perrodin-Singh to start her presentation. The floor is now yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jovan. First, I'd like to give you a visual description. I am a light-skinned black woman with my hair tied to the back, wearing glasses that are brown. I have a silver necklace, a dark purple shirt with a black blazer. Behind me is a Center for Black Deaf Studies plaque with the Gallaudet tower clock positioned on it. Have some plants behind me as well on top of a shelf. So thank you so much for taking the time during your lunchtime to tune in and hear about my dissertation. I do want to give you a content warning. There are some sensitive topics included in this presentation. So please prioritize your well-being while engaging with this content. Thank you. Next slide, please. All right, so this is an overview of what's covered during today's presentation. Okay, so the background behind how my dissertation came about. I am from the South, born and raised in Louisiana. And that is an area known of a place of struggle, especially in the southern part of the United States. There are a lot of adversities faced there. And so as a Black deaf woman, someone who was deaf, Black, I experienced that much more. We know that there was a lot of racial tensions during that time period, had existed long before 1619. And so sometimes we as a culture, as a people, are looked down upon, thought of as less than, typically at the mercy of others. And that did have its experiences, but to fight for equality when it comes to housing, education, for both Black and deaf has been a challenge. It's been a challenge to seek employment as well. And so I will explain my story from childhood to adulthood, navigating those experiences. Now, I come from a multi-generational deaf family, which some may view in a positive light, but it hasn't always had its positive experiences. Right. There was that sense of failure, in a way of being Black and being a female. Yet, I can see the advantages coming from that multi-generational deaf family. We might experience that burden of taking care of our parents, being their mediator, their interpreter. And we also know that white deaf families had more privileges than we did, especially when it came to employment and education. Now, even in our own country, in the United States, there was a lot of racial tension in their southern region. Slavery, racism, and even within our own communities, the Black communities, colorism, right? Colorism, very dangerous for us as a community to have those prejudices against one another. Also experiencing Jim Crow during that time as well. And so experiencing that colorism, feeling quote unquote not Black enough. Right? It were different ways to sort of find comb where we were as a community. And if you sort of match the color of a brown paper bag, that will be an indicator of whether you were Black enough or not. Or if you were to stroke a comb through your hair, whether your hair was able to pass through or not, could be an indication of how Black you were or how Black you weren't. Some did matriculate, some did have that education, some did go off and marry and have families. And so in a way, we experienced that judgment. And some of us felt like we were going through that same era of slavery again. Now, I'd like to highlight that there's limited research on Black deaf women in the United States. Dealing with oppression, with different forms of the system, right? For example, home ownership, education, access to housing, job opportunities. There wasn't enough research on the experience of Black deaf people in their quality of life. There also wasn't enough research on Black deaf women who come from a multi-generational deaf family. And so that's what sparked this idea for me. My purpose was to improve quality of life for Black people and Black deaf women in general. So what really helped me really share my story was to really look at literature that supported my theory framework. And so there was a book from Bell Hooks, and she talks about how we are able to express ourselves unapologetically, talking back in a gesture of defiance, with having that lens of healing. And typically in the community, talking back is essentially a way to signify that you're not respecting your elders. But talking back also has its positive views as well. Bell Hooks also talks about the home place. This is how I'll sign it. And essentially, it's a safe place for you to express yourself, to share your stories unapologetically, without any regrets. Authentically being able to share your story. And so through my autoethnography, I was able to explain my experience of being and becoming. My being involved not understanding things at first, but then later navigating realizing the things that I had to learn, learning about the negative experiences that I've had, and how I can transform that into a positive experience. Becoming was me becoming an adult, coming to terms with these things, understanding what I've experienced. For example, my life within microaggressions, or experiencing different stereotypes. Now, every dissertation has to have some sort of theoretical framework. It was difficult for me to find a theoretical framework because there wasn't enough research on the experience of Black deaf. But the theoretical framework that I used was the Black deaf gain from Moog. So I felt that was a pivotal part of really establish that framework. Black deaf gain revisited the idea and I'll refer Black deaf gain to BDG, but it essentially narrates that story of autism, oppression, and anti-Blackness that exists within our Black culture and our deaf culture. And it also celebrates the deaf identity, and acknowledges the impacts of segregation. It also acknowledges the language that exists within the Black deaf community. And it celebrates a language that exists only within our community. There is that standard version of ASL. But through segregation, we were sort of not encouraged to use sign language. So we had our own way of communicating, and we thrived in that. Eventually, what came about was that Black American result of being segregated and having to develop our own language. That also led us to code switching, being Black, being deaf, Being deaf, my mother was deaf, my father was hearing, my father was hearing. I constantly had to code switch between those identities. And navigating those types of isms, just because the color of my skin. There was also a racial and language difference that contributed towards this ideology. Continuing to communicate, continuing to sign really allowed us to gain more. And that ideology was formed through Black American Sign. Because it was my first language. That was the language I learned, and I saw my mother use. Over time, I did learn about standardized or white-centered American Sign Language. But I also acknowledge that the benefits of being Black should be celebrated. And so that was the theoretical framework that I used for my autoethnography. This is my literature review. And what I have listed are the ones that most contributed to my work. We know that Black people are underrepresented in the U.S. Census, and that could lead to several assumptions, whether or not we become successful, or not whether or not our community exists. But by the 1970s, it was evident that Black deaf people do experience incidents similar to other populations. Moores and Odin, their research did find some hidden incidents, some that weren't so explicit. For example, one's ignorance to Black deaf education, deaf children, or people in general. The lack of Black deaf professionals. Insufficient early identification programs for deaf and hard of hearing children who were Black. And also, unfortunately, those who classified Black deaf children as mentally retarded. Now we know that those challenges that we've experienced still exist today. There were 13 racially segregated schools for the deaf in the United States. And unfortunately, working here at Gallaudet University, at one point, we didn't admit any Black deaf students until 1945, which made it extremely difficult for Black deaf people to become leaders, to be professionals. And we have Woodward in 1976. Their literature acknowledged the language used in the southern region of the United States. And we were considered functionally illiterate, unable to read or write, and always needing to ask for help. But we saw our wins with Dr. McCaskill and their Black American Sign Language literature. It was really a discovery of a hidden treasure. And then we have Moak's work on Black identity, Black deaf identity, which helped to create that Black deaf game in which we celebrate the Black deaf community. Yet the research we have is still not enough. There's not enough research on Black deaf women here in the United States. My hope is to develop a better understanding for those who experience or want to research Black deaf women in general. My personal experience felt that in order to understand it from a cultural perspective, I needed to do this work. And I also wanted to focus on the treatment, the research, the political and sociological views, making sure that the social consciousness is raised and people are aware of the Black death experience and Black death gain. And of course, I have to include a methodology and a research design. For my autoethnography, I decided to write a story on essentially my experience. And there are two parts to it. I have the autobiography, which is my story, and the ethnography, which is the collection of data from my own personal narratives and experiences. Now, I decided to write about the different manifestations that have happened in my life. This shared experience of membership, sometimes even with strangers, really helped me appreciate my journey. Cultural membership as a Black deaf woman, having that shared cultural understanding really was uplifting. And for strangers, it could be engaging with the white deaf community, or engaging with others in other places of employment that served deaf people in society. Which factored an important role in supporting students within the Black deaf community. And so I wanted to make sure that I highlighted both experiences to validate and also to improve among Black deaf women. What I hope is to bring literature into emotion and action of my own. Elise does have several different techniques that they have listed. But for me, I decided to highlight these two. So my life, my experience, my family, my educational journey, as well as my professional journey, encompassed with different photos of myself childhood up until adulthood. I do also have some self-reflections that are included in my piece as well. Next slide, please. So I decided to categorize my findings into these areas from birth, ages 3 to 4, ages 4 to 13, 14 to 16, and from age 17 up until adulthood. This structure allowed for me to really show my experience through these different phases, especially at that point when I first entered college, which is the age of 17. So my autoethnography does encapsulate a lot of the experiences that happened during these periods, and you'll see some photos here of my childhood. And I do have one of my favorite birth stories that I'd like to highlight. I couldn't get my father's perspective on this story because, unfortunately, he's no longer with us. He has since passed. But it was nice for me to get the perspective from my mother. I was born in Lafayette, Louisiana, May 16th, 1976. And during that time, hospitals were segregated. And so I was in a ward where there was Black women and Black babies that were born. Now in the South, some of the hospitals were segregated in different areas. And Lafayette, where I'm from, is one of the areas that was impacted by segregation. I was born 3:17 in the morning. and actually was born en route to the hospital in my father's old brown truck. So a very unique story there, but in my mom's perspective, she thought it was a great day. And I was at that time her seventh child. So coming from a family of 8. I am child number seven. My mom knew it was going to be a good day and that the birth would be easy. And the universe did prove her to that point. I was born in the car on the way to the hospital. And of course, my mom as a black deaf woman was someone that I looked up to, used Black American Sign Language to communicate. But over time, she did learn more about the white standardized version of ASL. And when it comes to my educational experience, I remember starting school for the first time at the age of 3 at a Head Start program. Now at that time, all kids were hearing. There weren't any deaf kids in that Head Start program. And I always loved school. I always enjoyed learning. I always enjoyed being in the classroom. And when I was at the age of 3, when I look back at it, I would say that maybe that was my first memory. I remember being little cute red boots, and I loved those red boots. I wanted to wear those boots with my mom had to really get creative with hiding them so I wouldn't wear them so much. Another memory I have is riding the Head Start program. My first teacher, Miss B. We'll call her Miss B. And I remember her. She was an older black lady who was well equipped in dealing with Black children, being their teacher. And I remember being in elementary school, having someone like that to look up to. I didn't have any deaf peers or any deaf have someone in the classroom who looked like me. I can just remember the significance that it had. Now, all the other children in that class were hearing. I was the only one who was deaf. I also did have some speaking abilities, so I was able to use spoken English. But what I can remember is I had such a great experience. I always loved going to school. I always loved learning. Continue to have that love for learning even until this day. Now, at the Head Start program, we knew that there was a program made available for low-income families, providing them access to early education. And at school, I did use spoken English. At home, I used sign language. Again, being from a large family with 8 children hearing. My dad was hearing, my mom was deaf. I was constantly code switching between languages. And again, my mother's first language was sign language. My father spoke in English at the time, but I remember thinking to myself, how did you two meet? How do you communicate with one another? And what was mutual between the two is that they knew Creole French, and that was something that they had in common, and that allowed for them to have that shared communication. People would always say, your mom, her English doesn't seem so great. It's not clear, but when she speaks French, it's crystal clear, and I can understand her very clearly. So I remember those comments. And so after the Head Start program, I was enrolled into kindergarten through many years. At the age going to the seventh grade, I remember wearing hearing aids. And I remember feeling conflicted. Everyone in my class was hearing, and I'm the only one with this listening device. And so I remember making up this story. And someone said, don't worry about it. Just tell them that that's your radio. Tell them it's a radio that you're listening to. And I thought, you know what? That's actually a good idea. That's actually a good idea. And so I would go to school and kids would question me, like, what do you have in your ears? And I'm like, oh, that's just my radio. That's just my radio. Students would say, hey, that's not fair. You get to wear a radio and I don't. And I was like, well, I'm special. You're not. Special. You're not. And so I had to just be figure out ways to navigate that experience as a child, because the world could be very cruel, right? Kids are very cruel. Kids are very cruel. So I remember having to navigate that. And then we fast forward to what I call regular school, because I didn't really have an interpreter at that time. I didn't have an IEP either. There was no IDEA. None of that was in existence until I was in high school. And that's when I decided to go to a deaf school in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, school for the deaf. And so that's where my high school experience started. And that's actually when I started to learn about IEPs. That was actually my first time ever having an IEP. And learning, what it meant to educate deaf children. And I remember my mom being one of my biggest advocates, making sure that I had everything that I needed to succeed. I remember, she wanted me to continue going to a public school, and that's when we learned about that mainstream experience, being able to go to a program in a public school. But one of the challenges is that they didn't provide an interpreter before middle school. So at high school, ninth grade, very vividly. It was my first time being exposed to an interpreter, and I also remember having a deaf teacher as well, but I didn't have anyone that looked like me. I remember all of my teachers being white. And fast forward to when I graduated from high school and decided to go to college. Gallaudet was my first choice. And I had a great experience. I made several friends that our relationship lasted up until this day. And so a lot of what I do is thankful to my time here at Gallaudet. Now, I can continue on with my story, but I don't want to highlight or take away from about any of my negative experiences. I want to keep it positive. But I do want to acknowledge that a negative experience I had in the deaf school. Now, during that time, all of the kids were black. There might have been a handful of white kids, which was the opposite of my experience in middle school. And I remember a lot of the microaggressions that I experienced. But I didn't really understand it, and it didn't really become vividly clear to me until high school, right? Things that I thought were stupid, like for example, where are you from? I would say, well, I'm from Louisiana. They'll say, well, where are you really from? And I'm from here. I'm from here. Well, what about your family heritage? Again, my answer was Louisiana. I didn't really understand that their intention was to understand why my eyes were green, I was light skinned, and why I didn't look like everyone else did. And so I had to tell them the truth. As a people, sometimes we are deprived of information because we don't have that incidental knowledge or that access to other things that others may have. And so to my surprise, a lot of the students weren't aware about the history of racism, what it means to be oppressed, or the microaggression. For them, it was just their lived experience, something they experienced day to day, and it was normal. But I was astonished to learn that they didn't know about slavery. They didn't know that the reason why black people could be light skinned is being raped by white slave masters. And so I learned about this history. Engaging with them made me realize that they didn't have access to that history, or that contributed to what they didn't know. Right. Next slide, please.
To continue with my findings, I realized while I was documenting my story, I may be viewed as an angry Black woman. And I began to think, am I an angry Black deaf woman? And often people misunderstand that persona, the angry Black woman is not happy, is angry, is not satisfied. But I also think it's trying to share that space where they're experiencing through pride and joy, through suffering, and through that hardship, but still sharing that story through joy, sharing the story of womanhood. And so as I became more open to share my story as a Black deaf woman, finding that pride, finding happiness, finding happiness and joy was very critical. And it's a story that I could share as a win, as triumph. And it's also a space of no judgment. There's no punishment. I'm free to share my experience and hoping that it relates with other deaf Black women. And I didn't want it to feel it came from a place of shame or judgment. So that was very critical. When looking at my experiences. I really wanted to look at the experience of a Black deaf woman. And also in general, for Black people, we tend to feel that like an outsider, that outsider within, as common states in 2022. And when back then in slavery, for example, white people are the insiders, but Black individuals were seen as outsiders within. And we were still then trusted to nourish and take care of babies and children. We had to comfort white people. So even though we may have been we still felt like an outsider within. And the communities within outside were communities that serve Black deaf individuals. And so that dissonance between being inside but feeling like an outsider definitely occurred. And also from my narratives and my findings and looking at the data overall, I started to come with some conclusions that I do have deaf community cultural capital. And this is all based on my upbringing and the different experiences that I've overcome. Looking back at my childhood, that is part of the cultural capital wealth. And there's different areas of capital focused in Greenwood's research. And so how I'm able to overcome or navigate my experience, having role models, having people I could look up to who are Black and deaf and who are Black and deaf, and they also allowed me to witness them getting opportunities. They who didn't have job opportunities, who didn't have white professionals could have. And I think for me, having access to language, Black ASL, and also being from a bilingual household, and also familia capital. And I think that's really important. Acknowledge that is a part of cultural wealth. Because I did have access to a Black deaf family. And Black deaf people are strong, even though we overcome so many experiences. And we've overcome so many things, such as slavery, Jim Crow, and still that discrimination and oppression continues today. And we still are standing. Thirdly, cultural capital. Black deaf people were always part of my community. And I was able to build my network in that experience. And I also have resistant capital. resisting capital is where you're able to overcome disappointments, struggles. I didn't let those struggles in my life push me down or keep me down. I was very resilient. And Black deaf people are very resilient as a community and as a group. Next slide, please. Here's my conclusion. Focusing on Black deaf gain, continue to celebrate, being community together, and also to recognize our language has been deprived and taken from us, but we can reclaim it and share that with pride. So I'm very thankful for Black ASL and for Dr. McCaskill and her research, and Cecile Lucas, who's provided Black ASL to the front and to the community, and also recognizing Black community cultural capital, and how that's been passed down to generation to generation. And lastly, we are surviving over 400 years of slavery, Jim Crow, oppression, and our ancestors have experienced that has not stopped us, and it won't stop us. Next slide, please. The future implications of my research is that it matters that we continue to focus on Black deaf womanhood. We have a lot to offer, and I think it's really important for Black deaf girls to have access to research, to our stories. And I think it's important. I hope to continue this research, continue to interview Black deaf women and their experiences, their upbringing. What is it like to be a Black deaf woman? What kind of family did they come from? And looking at that diversity, when in womanhood and the Black deaf woman. And Black deaf womanhood should be part of research and part of data. I hope having this data, will continue to enrich Black deaf women in their lives and improve their overall quality. It's really important for young Black children to have role models to look up to, people with the same identity. I could have easily been born to a hearing family with no access to sign language, and I'm sure that would have impacted my life. But I'm very fortunate to have been born to a Black deaf family. I wouldn't want it any other way. I was very happy, very fortunate to be part of a Black deaf family, and I'm very proud of my identity as a Black deaf woman. So I want to end here and say thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Perrodin. We do have about 16 minutes with our audience. We'll take the time now for some Q&A. I am going to look at the questions we have. Let me see.
Okay, looks like there is a question from Patricia Johnson. How can we as a school, secondary or university level, provide more space and opportunities for these shared stories and learning from one another through our space and events? Second part of the question, what did you need when you arrived to Gallaudet University to help your identity and growing in deaf pride? That was the first question. So to answer that, one thing I can say about my experience when I got to Gallaudet University is that I already had a sense of self and a sense of pride as a deaf individual. And yes, I did struggle with my identity in terms of my father was hearing and my mom was deaf. So navigating code switching in those two different environments, and which is more prioritized and which is not. And so I had to realize I'm proud of both and all of those identities. I love being proud of my hearing father and being involved in a Black deaf family. And so now because it provided me an opportunity at school and to share my story and share my learnings with others. And so to create a space at different events and just really be open is my number one advice. Be open to listen because everyone has a story to tell and it should be heard. And just being open will allow to everyone have a space of openness without judgment and discrimination and criticism. And because we don't know what their experience is, and we could really learn from their background and stories. All right, second question from Sharon. Congratulations. Thank you. There's a great write-up about you and your new position in the High Five, and I enjoyed your presentation today. Could you tell us what your plans for your research will be available as a book? To answer that question, yes, I can share my future plans. I'm working with the Center for Black Deaf Studies to create my dissertation and publish my experience. And so I plan to also create a scholarship from the proceeds of my book and to support students of color, especially deaf students of color who are women. And so that's what I plan to do here at Gallaudet University. So I'm hoping that to be prepared and ready in the next few years. All right, from Aiden, what advice would you give to young deaf students of color who are trying to navigate both cultural and academic identities? Okay. Wow, that's a great question. First of all, I would have to say, be true to yourself. You are who you are. Don't separate your identities, your cultural identities from your academic identity. They all are in one. As a person, we can't separate our identities. You are multifaceted and they're all in one. I mean, that academic experience, your race, your deafness, your family upbringing, your cultural identities, you don't have to separate and make those identities silo anymore. Navigate them holistically, all together as a whole. Understand, it will also help you understand yourself. If you try to separate yourself within these different pockets, you'll get lost. So see yourself as a whole and it'll help you identify and navigate your future better. Okay, so another one from Clarissa. Thank you so much. Oh, it looks like that one was answered. So it was just a thank you so much. Okay. Oh, wait, I think I might have missed some. Where did those questions go? Oh, will there be recording available? Okay. It looks like, okay, there are more questions. Trinan, thank you for sharing. Who is your role model as a Black deaf woman? Okay. And then can't wait for the book. Oh, great. Okay, so I see the question about the role model. Great question. My mom, absolutely. Number one. She was my first example of a Black deaf woman. She taught me womanhood as a Black deaf person. And so I look up to her so much. I have so much respect for my mom. Her experience and her journey taught me so much. Okay, so I have another question that relates about the book that you plan to establish about your life from Charles. Uh, sure, Charles, please type your question and I can answer it. Okay, Judy Lomax. I frequently am told about the importance of role models. However, unfortunately, I find that some Black deaf people do not know how to be role models because they did not have the opportunity to experience that. So how do hearing parents help facilitate that resource for their Black deaf children? Thank you so much for that question, Judy. I would use other Black deaf professionals as an example for the hearing parents. You know, let them know that, hey, there's Gallaudet University. You're very fortunate to live nearby this university that has so many Black deaf role models. There's also different websites and resources you can share to those families. We live in the age of social media as well, so it's definitely easy to find deaf professionals, deaf Black professionals, and role models. I know sometimes parents feel so disconnected from the deaf community when they've never learned sign language or access to that. So let them know what they have access to, what's nearby, that there's social media, that there's websites. Have them check out those websites. And, just to be honest with you, social media is so much out there. It's very popular. People can easily connect with role models and resources. And some Black deaf people are not taught how to be role models, but they're there. They're out there. We have so many Black deaf professionals out there in this time of age, and they're popping up more and more every day. So I continue to encourage parents to look at social media and websites to find Black deaf role models. All right, there is a few questions about a recording and it being available to educate others. Yes, it will be available to the Center for Black Deaf Studies through their archive. All right, Shamika Dorsey, hey, hi. So school alumni, great to see you. So as for today, many Black generations don't identify themselves as a Black person. We need to change that narrative. We need to be able to see ourselves out in the community and also see ourselves as a benefit to the community because we have so much to offer. I mean, you can be a Black deaf role model and not even know it. So I think it's important to don't see yourself as less than. You have so much to offer, period. All right, another question, same question. Last one. What inspired you the most while sharing your personal story through your research? Oh, that's a tough question. It's inspired me. How was it inspired? Because it's definitely inspired me a lot. In the beginning, I knew that my story was multifaceted. It was a lot. So it could also harm and trigger other people, but I had to be vulnerable. I had to share my story. And I think it helped me to heal sharing my story. Because how do we get better if we don't share and we don't discuss our experiences?
And then I see a comment here from Dr. Stephanie Beatty. As a child or young person, what did you want to be when you grew up? And if that changed, when or why did it change? If I can be honest with you, I wanted to be a lawyer. That was my dream when I was younger. Then I went to college and I took an educational psychology class with Dr. Beal. And so they are the ones who convinced me to shift from wanting to be a lawyer to being really involved in education. Knowing that the deaf community needs role models. And even though she was hearing, she really had that passion and really saw that the community could benefit from someone like me. And so I love to debate, I love to talk a point down, right? And I also love to try to make the world a better place. And so that's what really drove my passion to wanting to be a lawyer at first. Hi, BB. Okay, and then I see from Carrie, for role models, are there any Black deaf authors you might recommend in children books or literature that would be beneficial and serve as role models beyond what you already mentioned? So one Black deaf author that I know of is Victorica Monroe. And so Victorica actually wrote a children's book called The Love of Basketball. And so being Black deaf, I loved that book and I highly encourage you to read that story as well with any Black deaf children. And then, okay, any recommendations? I also recommend, my literature review, My Story, right? We also have two other Black deaf women who earned their doctorate degree within the last year or so. And so one is Washington Shepherd. Oh, her first name escapes me at this time. Help me, please. Nisha Washington Shepherd. There we go. And so Nisha has shared their experience working at a PWI, a predominantly white institution. And then Regina Daniels, she wrote about her experience navigating life as a college student at a predominantly white institution as well, PWI. And so the reason I know Nisha and Regina is because we all grew up and are from Louisiana. So we share that cultural experience there.
Jovan here. Thank you so much, Dr. Perrodin-Singh, for joining us today. For the audience, if you would like her contact information, we're going to drop the link in the chat for you to reach out. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please do screenshot her email that we put in the chat so you can reach out. And
thank you.
Yeah, we are done for this afternoon. Thank you so much.
And thank you all so much for having me as well.
All right, we'll give it a moment for her email to be popped up in the chat. All right, Dr. Perrodin-Singh's email is in the chat. It's mary.perrodin-singh@gallaudet.edu. Beautiful. All right, it is time to end our presentation today. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.